All right, here we go. Now, I just want to remind you that if you need access to the presentation, you can always scan this QR code, or in the description of this YouTube video, you will find a link to this presentation. So you can go back at any time and you can explore any of these links on your own. So the colonies, Journeys with Jones Revisited. Here we go. The first thing we're going to talk about is England. Now, here we have it's called the Mother Country. That was where the Pilgrims originated from, England. And then they traveled over here. We're going to get into detail. We're going to look at a better map that kind of shows specifically where they settled. But what was life like back then? Well, no electricity and no running water. Half of the world had yet to be explored. Few towns. Most people lived in villages. They would live in a manorial estate where the Lord would live, and then most of the other villagers would live around the big castle or the manor. And most of the people during this time were what were considered peasants or working class. It was ruled by a monarchy, and we're going to discuss that a little bit today. Now, England. Where is England located? Well, right there on the map. So England is actually in the continent of Europe. So over here in Europe, you've got all these different countries. And what we have, England is actually this country right here. So the UK makes up Scotland, England, and Wales. So this is the UK this is Great Britain. So Great Britain is right here, and then the UK or the United Kingdom is all of this. So you've got England, Wales, Scotland. These are three separate countries. This is Great Britain, and when you add in Northern Ireland and Ireland, this all becomes the United Kingdom. And it is right over here in Europe, next to France and Spain, and Italy's right here. So that's where it's located, and it's always been there. So now let's discuss the English monarchy, and I'm going to take my picture up so it can expand the screen a little bit. All right, so Queen Elizabeth I. So around the time when the Pilgrims started to make their journey, or the people of England decided they wanted to colonize the new land, the Queen was Queen Elizabeth at the time. Now, we are going to look at we're going to look at Queen Elizabeth. This is a famous painting of hers. I've actually seen this painting. It is hanging in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. So Queen Elizabeth, she reigned from 1558 to 1603. She was the daughter of Henry VIII. You might have heard of him. He was famous for the many wives he had. But this is her, Queen Elizabeth. So she was, in fact, in charge. She is famous for saying she was married to England, but she was the queen. And what's really cool is a lot of her portraits back then, they wore wigs because they didn't actually wash their hair a lot. And so a lot of times they would keep it, people that were in the richer people or the monarchy would keep their hair cut really short, and then they would just put on wigs. They also wore very, very pale white makeup. And we're going to kind of look at some facts about the makeup because I thought that was pretty cool. Now, back then, if you were a pilgrim, you weren't wearing, if you were the typical average working class or the lower class or a peasant, you wouldn't be wearing makeup. But if you were a queen, you would. So makeup was prepared by mixing minerals. So they would mix different minerals, fig juice, other liquids. They'd grind it up in here. They'd add liquids like eggs. But a lot of it was lead or mercury based. And so it would make them sick, but they didn't often realize that it was the makeup that they were pounding and making them sick. Now, because Queen Elizabeth was so influential, the ladies in court copied everything she did. So Queen Elizabeth. Now, after Queen Elizabeth passed away, she was succeeded by King James I. This is a portrait of King James I. So Queen Elizabeth ruled until 1603. At that time, they had already sent out colonists to Roanoke, But then we start talking about Plymouth and Jamestown. That's going to be King James the First. This is a portrait of him. And he reigned from 1603 to 1625. So those are the monarchs that were in England at the time. Now, we are going to go look at the Windsor Castle because I want you to know a little bit about the English history and about the people that moved from England over to the colonies. So the first thing we're going to look at is Google Earth. Now, Google Earth, we will head to Google Earth and we will go to Windsor Castle. This is Windsor Castle right here. And as it rotates, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It's actually in Berkshire, outside of London. It was built in the 11th century. So by the time Queen Elizabeth and King James I were living there, it had been built around 500 years, 500 or 600 years. It is the longest occupied castle in Europe. And it is the largest inhabited castle in the world currently, with about 500 people living in it. Right now, the current Queen of England is Queen Elizabeth II, and this is her weekend home. And this is the entire castle. It has an open court down here. There's an open lawn in the center. It's got all of this. There's a tower. But that is Windsor Castle. Now, what I've included in this presentation, which you can go ahead and you can look at on your own a little later if you want to tour more in depth, is there's a 360-degree tour of Windsor Castle and St. George Chapel. So you can click on this and you can actually tour. You can go inside and you can tour all around inside Windsor Castle, which I thought was pretty neat. You can even go inside St. George's Chapel in Windsor, which is where, if you're a fan of current history, the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle took place. So this is the inside. I really encourage you. This was around during the time of the colonies and the pilgrims and the colonists. And I urge you to go through here, go back a little later and scroll through. You can also scroll through and visit the inside, and you can look around at different rooms. This is the State Banquet Hall. You can look at different rooms, the drawing room, and these are the same rooms that were there during the time of the colonists. Now, whether they were decorated exactly like this, probably not, but you can read about them and you can learn about them. Now, the next place we're going to go is Shakespeare's Globe, because I don't know if you realize, but Shakespeare was alive and well, or he was towards the end of his life, during this time period also. So we're going to go inside the globe. We're going to look at Shakespeare. First, let's look at some Shakespearean facts. So this is William Shakespeare. He was one of the world's greatest playwrights and poets. He was born in 1564 in England. And this is him. This is him, a drawing of him around the time he was 30. He became an actor. He wrote some poems. He performed for Queen Elizabeth and King James. So this is Shakespeare. You can read all about him, his sonnets, his poetry, all of that on this website. But we are actually going to go to Shakespeare's Globe. Now, this is not the actual original. The original burned, but it was built in 1599. So around the same time that the colonists were heading over to America, Queen Elizabeth would come over here and she would watch plays by Shakespeare in the Globe Theater. Now, like I said, this is a reproduction right here. The original was built, but then it did burn. But this is where he wrote his plays, and he built his playmaking company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. You can also go over here and you can look inside the Globe. You can find Globe facts. Let's take a look. You can actually tour this replica of the Globe Theater. And let's see, you can click on certain things and you can read about them. You can tour around, and it supposedly looks exactly like what it looked like during the time of Shakespeare. You can also, there's an app called Shakespeares Globe 360. Now, because it's an app, we can't access it right now, but you can go and you can download that app and explore some of that. So this is all taking place in England. The last thing I want to talk about before we head over to the colonies is Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey is a famous cathedral that is in London, and this would be where construction began in 1245. This would be where Queen Elizabeth and King James I, this is where they would go to services. It suffered huge damage in 1940 during World War II. But it's the coronation site. So every British monarch, every king, queen, from Queen Elizabeth before her to now, everyone who is a royal of England is coronated here, where they kind of make it official. They wear their crown and they become the new king or queen. So when Queen Elizabeth II, the current Queen of England, passes away, or if she abdicates or passes her crown over to Prince Charles, he will be coronated here in Westminster Abbey. It's also the burial place of some famous people like Charles Dickens, Sir Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Rudyard Kipling, and Queen Elizabeth. There are some links that you can click on to take a tour, but we are not going to do that today. However, you can do it on your own. Now, we are headed over to Roanoke. So now we're finally heading over to what is now the United States of America. It was not the United States of America back then. It was a colony of England. So what I found here was a really cool video, and I'm not going to play the whole thing.
Adventures. Today we're going to visit Fort Raleigh National Historical Site. You might know it by its more popular and mysterious name, the Lost Colony. Fort Raleigh is located on the northeast side of Roanoke Island, between the Roanoke and the Croatan Sounds, along the Outer Banks of North Carolina. In April of 1584, the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, sent an explorer named Sir Walter Raleigh to the New World to establish a colony.
So this is a really cool video that you can click on in the presentation and you can watch it. But it is currently what Roanoke looks like now. And so picture it. It's been almost 100 years since Columbus first arrived in the Americas. The Queen of England, Elizabeth I, wanted to make an English settlement in North America. So the settlement was founded by Sir Walter Raleigh, who we're going to be learning about in a little bit. Now,
weekly adventure.
Where was it located? So this is the modern United States of America. It wasn't like that back then, but Roanoke was right about here. It was the first colony. It was established by Governor Ralph Lane in 1585 on Roanoke Island. So on Roanoke Island, and is what is now Dare County, North Carolina in the United States. Now, here's the thing about Roanoke. It was established in 1585, like I just said. But it was evacuated, and they don't quite know why it was evacuated, okay? We just don't know. Well, we do know why it was evacuated at that time, but then it was reestablished, but then it was abandoned. Abandoned is what we don't know. We don't really know why it was abandoned. I have another little video here. I'm just going to play just a little bit.
A daring group of spirited settlers cross the Atlantic Ocean and attempt to establish their very first English settlement in the New World, called Roanoke. Not a single one of those poor people would ever be heard from again. So, what happened to the mysterious lost colony of Roanoke? Let's find out in today's episode of Colossal Mysteries.
So this is an episode of Colossal Mysteries. So you can go here and you can look at it. You can watch this little video. You can click on it on the presentation and watch it on your own time. But they're not quite sure what happened. Were they killed by an indigenous tribe? Did they leave on their own? Nobody really knows. But what we do know is some of the things that they ate back then in the colonies. So back in the colonies, food was a little different from what they were used to in England. Now, when the colonists first arrived in America, one of the most important crops was corn. Several indigenous tribe members, which are Native Americans, showed them how to grow corn, how to make cornmeal. Eventually, they began to grow wheat, rice, oats, beans. They would hunt for different game. They would fish. They did have some livestock, sheep, cattle, chickens, and pigs. In the winter, they would save up the food, or in the summer, they would save up food for the winter. Remember, they didn't have refrigerators back then. So they didn't have, a way to keep things fresh. So what they would do was they would wait, and they would either smoke the meat in the summertime, or they could freeze it in the winter, keep it frozen during when it was really cold. So they would usually tend to butcher their larger animals in the fall or winter. Now,
400 years ago.
Now we're going to move on to the Mayflower. So Mayflower. Everybody's heard of the Mayflower. It was an English ship that transported a group of English families known today as pilgrims from England to the New World. So they came from England and they traveled to the New World. Now, it took 10 weeks at sea. There were 102 passengers and a crew, which are the people who would man the ship, of about 30. Now, that was in 1620 by the time they landed here, but they actually started out here in 1608. In 1608, a group of English families left England for Holland. So they originally left and went to Holland for a little while because they wanted to be able to worship freely. But by 1620, the community determined to cross the Atlantic and go to America, which they considered a promised land where they could establish Plymouth Colony. They had originally hoped to reach America by early October using 2 ships, but delays and complications meant that they could use only one, the Mayflower. It was not a brand new ship. In fact, it was quite an older ship. It arrived in November, and they had to survive unprepared through a very harsh winter. What you can see here is a painting by Jean-Léon Harris of them signing the Mayflower Compact. Now, let's talk about the Mayflower voyage. I have a video tour that you can go in and watch, courtesy of Scholastic. And you can click through here and you can look at some different videos of Plymouth Plantation, the Wampanoag home site, the Mayflower, things like that. So you can click on that if you'd like to. A little bit later, here's some information about the Mayflower. So you can go on here and you can see, for instance, the ship. There was different sections of the Mayflower. We had the forecastle, steerage, roundhouse. Down here at the very bottom was the cargo hold. Where did the passengers sleep? Well, some of the cargo hold was the main storage for supplies. Between decks were where the passengers lived and slept. So between decks right here, they did hold cannons. The cabin is where the crew slept. So the passengers slept here. The crew members slept here. And you can even go on and look at the different routes that look at the route that the Mayflower took. You can also even tour the ship. So you can go to the Scholastic website and you can tour the ship and you can take the journey. This website is a really cool, my computer is messing up and it is not actually showing us. But here is their journey, where they started.
September 6, 1620. The Mayflower leaves England for North America. The ship's master, Christopher Jones, is an experienced skipper, but the 2-month journey will not be a smooth one.
All right, then next.
A crew of 30 men work the decks, adjusting the sails. While below deck, the pilgrims rarely get a breath of fresh air, except to empty their chamber pots.
Now it talks about chamber pots. Let me tell you about chamber pots. Chamber pots were their bathrooms. They had to use the restroom in a pot that they emptied over the side of the ship.
While below deck, the pilgrims rarely get a... Halfway to the New World, a violent autumn storm strikes. The ship begins to leak, and the main beam cracks.
Watch out!
A passenger is thrown overboard, but catches a rope and is rescued.
Is everyone all right?
On the verge of...
Eventually, they make it to Plymouth. So let's see what happens when they got to Plymouth.
They land at Cape Cod, Massachusetts on November 11th, after 65 days at sea.
Finally, the new
By December, they will make their way to Plymouth, their new home as winter sets in.
All right, so on this website, there's all sorts of different links that you can click on, virtual tours that you can take. And here you can look at virtual 1620. And if we had headsets, we could do this a little cooler, but we don't have headsets, but we can do it on the computer. Basically, you can tour around and see what Plymouth would have looked like. And there's the Mayflower. So you can click on that and you can look on that in the presentation slide deck. Now, what's really cool is they have the passenger list. You can actually go and look at the passenger list and you can see who was on the ship. So all of these people on the passenger list, you can go and read about them. Really interesting people. There were 102 passengers on the ship. Now, of the 102 passengers, only half lived through that very first winter. But of the half that lived through that very first winter, and I know we've talked about this before, but because of the half that lived through that first winter, the 51 people, there are now 35 million descendants of the original travelers on the Mayflower, which I think is really cool. So I kind of wonder like how far back my history goes. I don't know. Maybe I had some descendants. Maybe I'm a descendant of someone from the Mayflower. I haven't gone back that far. But 9 descendants of people that were on the Mayflower were U.S. presidents. There are tons of famous descendants, like Julia Child. She's a famous cook. Marilyn Monroe. This is Marilyn Monroe right here. Bing Crosby, a singer and an actor. Amelia Earhart. You might have heard of her. She was a female pilot and her plane got lost. We don't know what happened to Amelia Earhart. George W. Bush, one of our presidents. So there are a ton of people. I really hope that when you have time today, later in class, you go back and you click on this passenger list and you kind of look through and you learn about the different passengers. You might recognize some names. Now we're headed on into Jamestown. Now, Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement in North America. First permanent, because remember, Roanoke, they all disappeared. We don't know what happened to them. But Jamestown was the first permanent settlement. It was founded in 1607, served as the capital of Virginia colony for over 80 years. So it actually happened before the Mayflower, because the Mayflower was in 1620. In 1606, King James I of England gave the Virginia Company of London the charter to establish a new colony in North America. They financed an expedition of 144 men to travel to America aboard 3 ships named the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. They set sail on December 20th, 1606, and it took them 4 months. But when they landed, they established the Virginia Company of London, Fort James on Jamestown Island. This is a picture of a ruined tower of the 17th century church in Jamestown. And this is a current picture. This is what it looks like right now. So there's still some structures standing. Now, where is it located? Let's see, right there. Right there, Jamestown, Virginia. It was located on the northeast bank of the James or the Powhatan River, about 2.5 miles southwest of what is now modern Williamsburg. So let's go take a look at the Jamestown colony. First of all, we can take a tour, a virtual tour of a church from 1617, which I think is pretty neat. You can go to this website. It's called Jamestown Rediscovery, Historic Jamestown. You can go through here and you can look at this church. You can read all about it. You can look on the different models of what it looks like, how they've reconstructed it on this website. You can click all around here. And this is what it would have looked like on the inside. I guess this is where the preacher or pastor, depending on what type of religion, some of the elders would sit and people in the church would sit. Probably men and women would be separated. So that is a virtual tour you can take. You can also go to the National Park Service's website. So the National Park Service has a website on Jamestown, Historic Jamestown. part of the Colonial National Historical Park of Virginia. So that actually is a park that you can go and you can visit today. So if you're in Virginia, go check it out. But there's all sorts of interesting information you can find on this website. And last, we're going to talk about Sir Walter Raleigh. All right, Sir Walter Raleigh was an adventurer, and he established some of England's first colonies in North America. The colonies, some of them were later abandoned, but they paved the way for the establishment of Jamestown. So if it wasn't for Sir Walter Raleigh, we might not have founded Jamestown and might not have even flourished in the colonies. So this is a statue of him. Later on in his life, he was a little obsessed with the search for El Dorado, looking for gold. But we're not going to talk about that right now because it has nothing to do with the colonies. What you see right here is a reconstructed house. And this would be a reconstructed house of what a colonist would have lived in. And then this is a reconstructed village of the indigenous peoples in that area. Now, one of the most famous historical figures from that time period is Pocahontas. Now, the Disney Pocahontas movie is not exactly how it happened. In fact, when I say not exactly, it's not how it happened at all. So there's a lot to learn from this. Pocahontas was an actual person. She did marry John Rolfe. They did meet during this time period in and around the colony of Jamestown. Now we're going to head on over to Plymouth. So Plymouth Colony. This is a painting of Pilgrims Going to Church by George Henry Boughton. Above you'll see the Plymouth seal. This is the seal, and this is what their flag looked like. Where was it located? Right there. So Plymouth Colony was an English colonial venture in America from 1620 to 1691. So around the same time as Jamestown was being established, Plymouth Colony was being established. It was established or surveyed, the land was surveyed by Captain John Smith. The settlement served as the capital of the colony and developed as the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts. So up here in Massachusetts, this area, this shows a little more of Plymouth Colony from 1620 to 1691. Now, we can go look at Plymouth Rock VR. Let this load just a little bit. And sometimes this website lets us go in here and sometimes it does not. Let's go in. Is it going to let us look at Plymouth Rock? Let's see. Unfortunately, it's not exactly letting us load it, but if it did load, we would be able to look at Plymouth Rock. Let's see. Now let's try searching around this way. Will it let us load? There we go. Well, I went too far. As you can see, Miss Jones is not the best at navigating. Let's see if that lets us click on it. I'm trying to look at Plymouth Rock. Okay, that's not working very well. You can also take a living museum tour of Plymouth Plantation, which is has some structures to kind of look like recreation of houses that the Pilgrims built. So you can go in here and you can click around on here and you can look, click the picture below to start the tour, and you can look at some different houses. For instance, this is a house that was made all of wood. Even the roof was made of wooden shingles. This is what the inside of a house would have looked like of the colonists. The window is in the corner. Now remember, they didn't have glass, so it would have a wooden door to open the window. The house was usually only one room with one large bed. So if there were several kids, they'd have to sleep in the same bed all together with the adults or sleep on the floor on a pallet. Here is another example. They would sometimes hang sheets or curtains around the bed to keep them closed at night to kind of give them a little more privacy. This is an example of the fireplace. They would cook everything. You'd see they'd have all their pots around here, and that was where they would cook. It kind of looks like a gumbo pot. Let's look at house number 3. Here, example of the chairs that they would sit in. This would be an example of the street. And they would have a lot of outer buildings. They would have a lot of times the kitchen, not the kitchen, the smokehouse and the barn were all outside. They did have some tools to help them, but not tools like we have today. They didn't have power saws. They were using axes and handheld tools. Here's another example of the house. It has the green curtain around it. So that is a living museum tour. You can also click on the this would be what the Native Americans, what their home looked like. And this is again one of those that's very hard for me to navigate, but it would look like this on the inside. You can see they would store the wood. There are different skins. That would be the bed where they laid on. A lot of people would stay in the same room. So this is an example. And you can scroll all through here. You can go up close. You can go far. You can look at the ceiling. And this is an example of where the Native Americans would stay in their homestead. If you want to learn about the men's clothing, you can click on here. You can see they had their hats, their coats. Now, this is if they're fancy dressed. I'm sure they didn't wear this when they were building their homes and things like that. If you would like to see what the women look like, typical women's clothing items, they would have like a shift, which was a dress underneath. They would have different stockings, petticoats, the overall gown, shoes. It was very, in the summertime, they didn't have air conditioner and they wore a lot of layers, which I guess was great in the winter when they wore a lot of layers. And that basically is our tour. Now, last time we talked about the colonies, I showed you some really awesome books that we have in the library. But when I did talk about the History Smashers book, y'all have to read this book. It's so good. It's by Kate Messner. It's called History Smashers. It tells you all sorts of really cool facts about the Mayflower. But the cool thing about this is that it's a series. So she has History Smashers, American Revolution, History Smashers, what happened on the Titanic. And there's even a new one coming out called History Smashers and COVID, the pandemic. So she is coming out with more of these books in this series, but you should check this out today. It's a really good book. We also have some graphic novels. We have an entire series of graphic novels about colonial America. So if this topic interests you, if you want to learn about the colonies, like for instance, here's the Mayflower, or you want to learn about Jamestown, or you want to learn about any of these, we have this whole series, this whole graphic novel series that you can check out today if you want to learn more. We also have a series of I call it the spooky books, abandoned places, and we have one in the series about Roanoke. So you can read about Roanoke and find all about information about the lost colony. I've also provided some other resources here. So when we finish with this virtual tour video, and after you've watched the video, you're going to have a chance to open up the presentation, this presentation that I'm using right here. And you can go in here and you can look at cuisine of the colonies, this food. You can look at different resources that I have here to help you with the next step of your assignment for today. Maybe even get a few bonus points. As always, you can find all of our presentations and all of our Journey with Jones at our library's website, lomlibrary.org, and we have an entire link called Journey with Jones. And if you click on that, you can find over 30 virtual field trips about a whole lot of different places all across the world. If you have any questions and you're not, you can email me. If you're a student live at middle school, you don't have to email me. You just come ask me in the library. This is for other people. If your parents or community members are watching this and they have questions. And remember, follow us on social media. Follow our library on social media because I do post a lot of information, especially where we're going to be traveling next. So I hope you enjoyed this Journey with Jones, and until next time.